disclaimers, my warnings. What we're going to talk about today is open source threat intelligence, how basically you can build your own program using public sources of information and open source tools. Real quick, are there any threat intelligence vendors in here? One? We'll jump you in afterwards. So, all right, a little bit about myself. I'm an Iowa farm boy. So, got one person from Iowa in here. The rest of us are going, no, not me. This is before I got into information security, and I was much happier. So, I'm a technical geek by trade, which when you have to explain to your spouse why your power bill is so high, and you point to the heater in the basement office, that's the reason right there. I haven't caught on to the e-reader craze yet. I'm very tactile, and a lot of my books have handwritten notes that I just, Kindles for some reason, whenever you put whiteout over them, they don't work very long. When I was in the Navy, I actually thought I could pull this mustache off. Any other veterans in the room? Thank you very much for your service. Let's give them a hand. I'm a science fiction fan. If you guys can figure out which guy I am, I'm the one in white. And I happen to be certified by an actual organization. However, being a Scrabble freak that I am, I like to mix things up. So I took my certifications, and they actually spelt out GIC IT crimes, which is sort of unique being in information security. So how many of us have already seen this before? Yeah, we put this up in our SOC when we have visitors and dignitaries and the executive leadership coming in, and it makes us, war games like. And most folks will tell you, this is what threat intelligence is. And I look at this and I go, ooh, amazing. Ooh. So originally, what we wanted to do is take a look at how we can take this information that's publicly available, whether it's through our internal systems or other public sources, and get in front of some of the different things. Things like malware distribution. Has anybody ever had to respond to malware? Two hands, the rest of you are lying. These are things that are commonly going on the internet that we can actually get out in front of. Well, if we had the ability to identify this before it hits our networks, we could defend the brand, make well-informed decisions, basically prioritize our resources. Does everybody have as many resources as they need in their organization? No? Unlimited budgets, staff of thousands? Yeah, no. Ultimately, this is to reduce the overall reduction of impact to our business organizations. Now, my partner at Rendition says that I tend to be too wordy, so he told me that I needed to trim this down. So what I ended up coming with is we have the ability to get out in front of bad things from the internet so we could ultimately do good, which is his way of telling me that, Ed, you talk too much. So today, a couple of the things that we're going to cover is how this all began, my experiences in threat intelligence. Hopefully we're going to get to the live demonstration if the demo gods allow us and time. But we're going to cover everything from how this originally started with me all the way into the business value that threat intelligence can provide organizations. So in the beginning, there was the internet, and Al Gore said it was good. So we used to have this thing called security through obscurity, and that stopped working years ago. Then we started getting into denial, hope, and faith. These are not strategies for information security. Now, I started hearing things back in 2010 that sort of started making me wonder strange things, like who would attack us? We're in Ohio. Nobody would attack us. We make clothes. This was an interesting one. We're too small to be on anybody's radar. I don't even know what that one meant. We don't have anything anyone would want. Now this one I had to ask the question, and I was told after asking the question that I needed to attend a Dale Carnegie course. Because if you have nothing that anybody would want, why are you in business? Sort of a oxymoronic statement. We do not have a large footprint. Now for those of you who don't know me very well, I am a former sailor, so I have very colorful language at times. And when I heard these, the first thing that popped to my mind was whiskey, Tango. We'll stop right there and go right back to the whiskey because we're all going to need to drink after this. Ultimately, what ended up happening one day was somebody accused me of being a FUD peddler. Is everybody in here aware of FUD? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Having been in the industry for over almost 25 years now, being accused of a FUD peddler is like time to grab a pointy stick and start stabbing it in people's eyes. Needless to say, I was not a happy bunny. But it did bring up something rather interesting. I had made these claims because, having worked in information security, does anybody think that the internet is comprised of rainbows, unicorns, and fluffy bunnies? What's that? Cat videos? Okay. So I made this statement, carte blanche, and just took it that they would actually accept it, except for I made the mistake of not having anything to back it up. So this got me thinking on how to do this. So ultimately what I did was, okay, if I'm going to be attacked with FUD, I need to have quantifiable empirical evidence. However, it did bring the larger question to mind. Do business leaders actually believe this? Was that? No, okay. Everybody else heard that beep? Oh, okay. Which brought the bigger question to mind, were business leaders actually thinking these types of things? You know, and again, this is a question of, well, how do I get the information needed to be able to prove that Ed's not insane, which that's totally different topic, presentation. So what I came up with was documenting a server that I can put up with the sole purpose of watching it get compromised. Basically, I needed a fall guy. So in November, I ended up putting up a server and basically watching it to see what was going to happen, which brought the question, would anybody take the bait? Now, how long do you think the system was online before it got its first attack? How long? 2 minutes. 2 minutes? That's rather aggressive. So now I should say with this server, I had 2 services running on a residential IP address that I had acquired. The first attack came in within 34 minutes. Now, when I say attack, I don't mean it was scanned. I mean somebody actually started throwing passwords at it and trying to brute force into the account. But that's okay because there are allies of South Korea, right? We're good with that? So the other service that was running was a web application. And it came in a little over a day later, actually well over a day later, but that's okay because they're from Texas. That makes it all right, right? That's domestic-based? Okay. So I had a colleague of mine say, well, why do you think you're being attacked? Right, you've got this data. I said, well, number one, I never promoted it to any search engines, so this is a standalone residential IP. It was not part of any existing domain, so it wasn't a subdomain off of something I already owned, it was just thrown up there, which brought it to the aspect of, I just threw it up there. Are there any web developers in the room? Couple? Okay, so another reason why I thought I might be being attacked is because I'm pretty sure that's not normal web behavior. Attempting to cap the Etsy password file, is that normal web traffic? So what I ended up doing was taking, again, some more open source tools and providing this information to see, well, who was interested in me. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but over a 30-day period, what I discovered was that I'd become very popular, or at least my one IP address had become very popular. Now, being from Columbus, this could all be coincidence because we have some very large organizations in Columbus, and my IP could have been mistaken for any one of them, right? Any NCIS fans in here? Couple? What's Gibbs rule number 39? Does anybody know? You win the prize. Absolutely correct. But now I had another aspect, because remember I told you I was a geek. So I've got a little bit of information, and I got hooked on it. So, natural progression in order, started getting into honeypots. Anybody ever work with a honeypot? They can be a wealth and plethora of information of what's going on. Except for now, you've got a geek who actually wants to know more. So we're going to go into this a little bit in more detail. But the different types of honeypots that I had employed at various locations geographically throughout the US started providing some interesting information coming back. And we'll get into that here in a bit. But what can I do with it once I get that information? Well, from an intelligence aspect, I can see where these source attacks are originating from. Are these automated attacks, or are they actually people behind keyboards? Most of them were automated attacks. And every now and then, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd sit down in front of the system and watch what was actually going on live, or watch some of the recordings, and you'd see somebody backspace. Normal applications that are bot-driven don't usually backspace. That usually tells me that it was somebody there, and I always wanted to break in and start a talk session saying, hey, you're going to be in a presentation. Send me your contact information. I'll give you a link. Also, because of the fact I was collecting this information, I could now store the historical progression of bad. This is important because as I saw repeat offenders, I could actually track how far back that IP address or that domain that it was coming from, or that location where it was coming from, had actually been a quote-unquote bad actor. And then I could see actually what they were trying to do, depending on the interaction that they were having with the honeypots. Things that I could do, turn around and leverage that information for my own purposes, attack and penetration testing. It's amazing that somebody will leverage a new piece of malware on a honeypot. Not normally a good thing, because my partner at Rendition is one of the foremost reverse engineers when it comes to malware. And if it can slide by most antiviruses, now our tools can too. So you get a little bit of extra value there. Also, from an incident response and forensics aspect, we could take that malware and now catalog it, and now we can actually start looking on that and finding that in existing systems. So now the comment that started all of this off and what got me accused of being FUD was making the comment of Internet of Bad Things. Again, having grown up with the Internet and within networks and seeing the progression of information and how it's handled within the organizations, and the criminalization of the Internet became a big aspect. So October 29th, 1969, this is important because this is what the Internet originally started out with. FYI, that was not a Friday evening, so I don't want you guys thinking that, the geeks, true, we don't go out on Friday nights. It was actually on a Wednesday. So pre-commercialization, very small network, very easy to manage and maintain. However, this is where we're at today. We are in a global, not to use the buzzword, global economy where we are interconnected with everybody else. Does anybody in here still take orders or fulfill orders through the U.S. Postal Service? Do they get paid through hard checks? No? Well, because a lot of our commerce actually occurs online, the criminals have picked up on this, and they're using these new things called computers to also affect these types of attacks. Just to bring you up to speed on that. So soon after the Internet went commercial, we started seeing things like this. And we know to click the links on things when they have the SSL certificates, right? Where's Valerie at? Because criminals don't use supporting infrastructure and secure methods for doing this. And then ultimately one day we had a game changer show up on the scene. Anybody know who that is? The Nigerian prince. And if you only send me $5,000, I will help you get my inheritance. Well, one does not simply inherit the fortune. So, before we start getting into threat intelligence programs, let's talk about what threat intelligence is not. It's not Google. Google by itself is not a threat intelligence program. I actually had somebody said, well, I'll just Google out the IP address and that'll tell me everything I need to know. Google is good. Google has a lot of good value and information that you can pull from it. So, threat intelligence in and of itself is not the Internet. Again, it's just one tool that can be used. Threat intelligence is not just a list of IP addresses and domain names that have been listed by somebody as being bad. Although you will hear a lot of folks that say, buy our threat intel, and ultimately what you end up with is a list of IP addresses and domain names. To which my first common question is, why is this a threat to me? Well, it's doing bad things. Okay, again, why is it doing bad things? How is it doing bad things? Collecting stuff and doing nothing with it. So we'll get into a little bit of data hoarding a little bit later, but we have a tendency to get a lot of information, but we don't process it. We don't analyze it. Producing content that yields nothing of value. Now, when you want to present your information around threat intelligence, it's got to be relative and in context of the organization. If you're in financial services, seeing attacks that go against manufacturing may not apply to you. Again, you have to apply the context that works for your organization. It is not a replacement for boots on the ground. You do not get a new blinky box that relieves you of 5 headcount. If anything, threat intelligence programs will increase the overhead associated with it, depending upon how your organization defines your operating environment. And it's not a substitute for network monitoring. You want to maintain that continuous monitoring because you're going to leverage that information to identify if anything else has been identified as potentially being bad on your network. So when we talk about the threat intelligence universe, we're talking about multiple aspects. A lot of information that comes in and is available for consumption. Today we're going to focus in on the internet aspect, human, and the automated side of the house. So things that are generated by our firewalls, by our IDSs and IPSs, log files, these types of things. So diving right into what a threat intelligence program actually is, it's a management program. It needs to be managed as a multi-step process for the sole purpose of providing our leadership with a strategic advantage. The ability to make a decision based upon all available information. It also has the side benefit of having a tactical application, taking the information and being able to do something with it. What the intelligence communities like to call as actionable intelligence. So the relationship, and I spoke on this earlier, we have the aspects and dimensions of the operating environment. And this consists of your industry, geographical location, your leadership, political aspects, your employees. These are all different areas that you have to be considered as you're distilling and walking through the information that's available. Real quick hand, does anybody know what their employees are talking about on social media? There's a lot of information that we get when we're running a penetration test that we glean right off of social media. And employees are putting it out, you know, hey, I'm looking for this, or hey, I've got pastebin data that I need somebody to take a look at, and they're crowdsourcing their source code. I don't know how many passwords that I've recovered off of sites like pastebin where somebody's just posted up there trying to solve a problem, trying to get things expediently done. But getting to that level of granularity, we have to walk through the process of collecting it. That requires infrastructure, that requires management's commitment and understanding of what threat intelligence is and how it can be leveraged for the organization. All the way through processing down to analysis and production. So what do we get into? What do we look at? So from and I'm going to throw up a little bit in my mouth when I say the word cyber. Thank you. Cyber threat intelligence ecosystem comprised of the areas of technology itself, offense and defense. Those are the 3 areas to look at and to consider. Most threat actors have a common MO that they will operate on. We are creatures of habit. We tend to use the same tools because we're familiar with them. Same thing from the defense side. We have certain ways that we respond to various threats, whether that's by initiating a full-blown incident response plan, or merely blocking for a temporary period of time for a hostile or bad IP address. Gaining this type of information, either from an offensive or defensive capacity, is great intelligence collection. Because if I can figure out how long to probe your network before you respond, that tells me a lot of information. Similarly, the defensive side, if we know the same tools that are being used by the same threat actors, their techniques, their practices, we can take that information and look for those behavior patterns within our own organizations. So going through each one of the processes within threat intelligence management, these are some of the key questions that we have to answer right off the bat. Right now, threat intelligence is a big buzzword. And the vultures, vendors are swooping in on it. It's like APT, Blinky Box, ooh, prevent the sonification of your big data. So when our boards and our leadership hear things like threat intelligence, they're asking us the question, what is it that we should be doing? Well, what is it that you want to be aware of? How do we correlate that information to better suit and protect the organization? Again, when it comes to data collection, having it accessible and available is one of the main areas that we kind of need. If you don't have access to the information, your intelligence is going to wane. Just as well as when it comes to, is it timely and current? Pulling a reputational database that is 6 months out of date may or may not be of benefit and value to you. What is your confidence in the source? If you're getting information from an automated tool, are you going to weigh that the same way and put as much confidence as an analyst who's actually spent time reversing it and taking a look at the information and diving deep into the different aspects of the information itself? Whether that's a binary, whether that's a new domain, whether that's a new behavior pattern within the organization. Does it provide sufficient detail? If it's just a bunch of IP addresses that you're receiving as your threat intelligence, what does it actually tell you? You're having to put a lot of faith and confidence in the organization that's providing it that it's accurate. And again, it doesn't answer the key question of if it's relevant or why it's a threat to you. So different types of information that you can get from different sources: public, private, free, commercial. Free is in beer. Free beer is good, right? Right. Oh, there we go, right. You can get the information from different sources, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, IRC. If anybody in here still remembers IRC? Okay, a couple of folks in here. Security conferences, peer communities, ways to share information. The automated aspect, where is the information coming from? Well, we're seeing our firewalls get beat up on a regular basis from this known actor or this specific IP address. It's going to come in a lot of different flavors. And when I say a lot of different flavors, a lot of different flavors. You can be issued a straight HTTP web page or web-enabled rich text format message, raw text. I've actually gotten threat intelligence sent to me via the Postal Service. I'm one of the few people that my postman hates because I will get bundles of stuff and then I am spending time scanning it in, turning it into OCR, and actually doing something with it. Again, from the internet side of the house, information is solely available. It is available in great abundance. There is no shortage of data. We can get all this information, but one of the key things to keep in mind, you want to normalize it during your analysis phase. Put it into something that you can actually use. You want to validate the information. Is it current? Is it timely? Is it relevant to me? Then you want to assess it. You want to start putting it into context of your organization. This is why one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate of building out your own threat intel program. Cookie cutter systems do not apply across the organization. How many of you worked with a vulnerability assessment engine before, like a Nessus or a Nexpose? How many of you are frustrated when you get the reports back and it's got everything listed as a high? A number. Why? Because what's high to you may not be high to the tool. And again, it's just a tool. So you want to add in that business context that's unique to your organization. And then you want to start categorizing it. This is what it applies to. We're seeing senior leadership, or we're seeing general counsel emails, or we're seeing these types of attacks occur. And again, once we get into the production phase, it has to be actionable. Me sitting here telling you that the Earth's going to get hit by a meteor, can we do anything about that? No, we call Bruce Willis and Ben, and they take care of it, right? Armageddon. We have to be able to do something with it. We have to be able to make decisions based around it. It needs to be in the holistic view of the enterprise. And when I say holistic view of the enterprise, not just your primary headquarters in your office. Think through your supply chain. Think through your third-party vendors. Do you think that right now Target's team is starting to look at all the third-party vendors a little bit more closely? Maybe? No? Who's in here and ready for a nap? And it must be flexible. Now, one thing I will caution folks on threat intelligence, because of the fact that we have this dimension of the human element in it, will not always be accurate. In fact, as an adversary, I'm going to go with the fact that if I can plant a false flag, or what's called the warning paradox, where I can trigger your events and have you respond to it in a certain way, I'm going to watch and see what happens. And the normal analogy I give is the battlefield assessment. We've got intelligence that says that at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, our east gate's going to be attacked. So what happens? The base commander steps up security patrols on the east gate, right? Well, as an adversary, I'm going to watch that. And if I see that response, I'm going to hold back and I'm going to wait. And then I'm going to shift tactics. What's the one benefit as an adversary that I've just done? I've created doubt in your threat intelligence capabilities. Everybody in here familiar with The Boy Who Cried Wolf? Same concept. We will make mistakes in threat intelligence. This is not an exact science. When we start getting into the dissemination, there's really only two consuming business units within our organizations. The technical folks that sit on the firewalls, the IDSs, and we can take all of our information and create some really cool things around that. From the business side of the house, we can start making some interesting observations. We've got a competitor that's checking out our website. That may or may not be a big deal. What happens if the competitor starts checking out your new development website that you have put up but haven't really publicized? Starting to see a large amount of data going to places that you don't have business to. Might that be a cause for concern? Should leadership be aware of it? Maybe. It's the internet. We trust it. It's going to Kiev. Finding malicious software within the organization. So one of the things that we've done is being able to catalog all this malicious software. Now the drawback to this is once we find something, you can't unlearn or you can't unsee what you've seen already. It means you have to take some type of action on it. So let's talk about the actions. You have your preparatory, your preemptive mitigation. If you see an uptick in spam coming from a known URL, getting out in front of that and being able to block that at your border prevents you from having to do cleanup. Is that a good thing? Or are we all, self-masochistic and we love the extra work? It allows for enhanced monitoring. It also allows for us to have a focused response. Again, we've already determined that we don't have as many resources as we need properly. So when I started doing all this from the technical aspect, one of the things I looked at, and I told my wife that this was going to be, this wasn't going to cost us any money. This was just going to be a management thing. Famous last words. And ultimately, this led me to going to Jared on several occasions. So again, BSD-based systems, free to acquire. I love this because it's robust platform support, which means I could use old equipment, which wasn't going to cost me that much money, but again, more money than I had originally told my wife. Easy to use native tools. Now, any Unix system administrators in here? Couple? They're a dying breed, aren't they? Has anybody ever in here had to use sed, awk, knock, grep? Yeah. Very intuitive, right? One of the benefits of the platforms is they're easy to automate. And I will tell you that I am not a developer by trade. I am a script kiddie, and duct tape and baling wire are my two favorite things, because I can Google out to figure out how to do things, which is almost dangerous. There are a number of third-party add-ins that I can include, and those will be covered later on in the slide presentation, actually towards the end of the slides. Highly customizable. I can make specific appliances to do specific things. I could make a Linux system emulate a Windows-based domain controller. I could put a system out there to replicate FTP and web services. I could do things with it, which after being in management for so long is a little bit odd because I'll get these like really creative ideas and it's like, oh, we can do this. No, we can't. So ultimately, one of the things I needed to do was move beyond Columbus. So I ended up reaching out to friends and colleagues around the US and said, hey, I want to be able to do this. Can you do this for me? Can you install this package? Now, I will tell you, there's a spot in here for Des Moines, Iowa. That is actually my grandmother who was running a honeypot. My grandmother actually got a physical system because I spent 2.5 days trying to explain to her, yes, Grandma, click the link. But you've told me never click the link. Click the link. I'm your grandson. How do I know you're my grandson? Security to the extreme. So I actually drop shipped her a box out there. But I started getting in some really unique information as a result of it too. Then I hit another problem. I had to get all that information back to one central location. So I had to stand up yet another system to act as my hive. All the systems had unique identifiers, so that was easy. I was able to use some scripting to push the information back to me on a regular basis that I could then further normalize and do some of the pre-processing around these different feeds so that I could turn around and leverage them. So ultimately, this was my first stage right here, what I was able to come up with. And I'm a command line geek. I work well in the dark side. However, a good friend of mine, Sean, he's like, Ed, you're in management now. He goes, do you think an executive is going to read that? So any executives in here? Couple. So in favor of that, I opted for the dashboard of bad things. This is a lot easier to consume. More importantly, this is in context to my network. So that way I knew exactly what I was looking at as it applied to my organization of honeypots. And of course, because of the fact that I love dashboards, I made my dashboard of bad things from a global perspective. Again, why was anybody halfway across the globe interested in my one IP address? Or now my bee farm, as it were. So the initial proof of concept, normalizing the data, validating and vetting the sources. I had a high confidence in the source data was actually mine. Ultimately, I was able to produce a couple of different things. Bad IP addresses. Well, how do I know they were bad? Well, there's no reason for them to be touched. Somebody was interested in them. Whether that's through brute force attacks or through scanning or any number of malicious activity. Started being able to profile the threat actors. One of the slides that's not in here was actually I was able to aggregate a number of 8 individual groups that had been targeting these systems. And the reason why I know was because they were the same 8 that kept doing the same thing on these different systems. Geographically dispersed, no connection, but I could tell from the way that they were behaving and the IPs that they were using, the same type of malware that they were using, get an idea of what their standard MO was. There we go. So again, initially started off with some low-end hardware. The original server was an i3. It lasted about 90 days before it died, and I had to go to Jared and go buy a new server. Started off, again, making a lot of scripts to do a lot of the automation for me, so that way every morning when I would come down, I'd have a nice little report. Nothing fancy, just told me the information that I needed that I felt was relevant. Discovered that I was processing on average between 700 and 920 megs of data per hour, which when you have a spouse that's binge watching Orange is the New Black, this is not what you want to have to be called upstairs for. Third trip to Jared. So overall, strategically, I was starting to see who was interested in little old me. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I have one IP address, then it grew. Saw new attack patterns occur, different methods that were being employed by various organizations. And it was really interesting because you could start seeing the maturity of some of the organizations as far as how they would scan systems You can tell from the folks that were scanning all the TCP and IP, or the TCP ports on a system versus those that were targeting very specific ports. Those that were trying very unique combinations of username and credentials. Again, identifying malicious software, different types of malicious activity. Which allowed me to start planning for mitigation strategies, because if I saw systems on the East Coast getting hit with something, I could then update information across my honeypot network and actually prevent some from hitting the West Coast or Midwest even. So again, the operational aspect, things that we can actually do to protect the organization, or in this case, a fictitious organization. And ultimately, I could draw maps and dashboards, which is always important because that's what matters, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the analysis aspect. So what can we discover with all this information that we're collecting? Well, number one, which is most important, most people tend to move to, is looking at, who's trying to brute force our root and privileged accounts. But let's actually put that a little in context. So default credentials usually are associated with these types of devices. Okay, good to know. But does this really tell us anything? No. We know that default credentials are going to be attempted. Looking at, several thousands, tens of thousands of root login attempts doesn't really tell us anything. Well, let's flip that around a little bit. Let's look at the non-root and non-admin based accounts. What we'll start seeing is some really unique things. So, gateway devices might be a concern, right? If I can take over an organization's gateway device, what might I be able to do with it? Watch everything and not have to go any further, right? So, default credentials being used for, Juno IS and some cloud-based services might be interesting. This was an interesting one. Somebody was actually scanning an IP address for a Polycom, which tells me if they're scanning for it, there's probably instances where that's actually out on the internet. Also, I could start taking a look at some detailed information. So when systems and applications interact, they like to exchange a lot of information. So I was able to actually see what some of these adversaries were using. So JCraft, for example, which was a SSH client written in Java, because Java is secure, right? How many of you have sat through Dave Kennedy's Java spiel and rant? He gives you like 4 options of things you can do with regards to Java, and they're all like, remove Java, remove Java, remove Java, and D is like all of the above. So every time I see an update go through, I see that, 3 billion devices, and I'm thinking 3 billion compromises. But getting back into it, we can take a look, Python-based. Python is heavily scriptable. Probably somebody has written a bot around this and using that as the framework. This one got me, SSH for the .NET library. .NET's used predominantly where? Windows. Is SSH normally used Windows? Only usually from the client side, going out to a server, but okay, Microsoft to the win. This one I loved because I was digging around with this. So there was this product, and it didn't have that many hits, which is what drove my attention to it. So this product that had come out from Core Lab called Secure Bridge, and it was used for bridging that last mile between insecure communications and database backends. Well, during the search, I ultimately came across this. Product design flaw. There was a timing issue with that. So now I was sitting there looking at it going, oh, this system probably has been compromised, and this is probably some third party that's using it as a jump-off point. Again, interesting information when you start getting into it. One of the things that I ended up looking at was that the Tuwa College, which had attempted multiple brute force attacks against me, really likes PuTTY. Now, why is that important? Well, Tuwa College is in China. And the standard default PuTTY installation for the English version comes out like this. Now, colleges tend to have great amounts of security, right? Nobody from OSU is in here right now, right? Okay, if you're from OSU, don't tell me. So organizations and colleges, community colleges, academic research institutions, places that are used to sharing information, have great, strong security. Initial thoughts or, okay, great, the IP address goes back to China. It must be China, right? Just like it was North Korea with Sony. So, actually got the picture, found out where they were. But again, profiling an organization or a threat actor versus attribution. From a tactical aspect, when you're cleaning up and trying to respond, you're going to be more concerned with the profile than where the attack's coming from. Ultimately, it is important to know. Again, it's going to be based upon your organization and your industry on how far you go. Judging by the fact that it was a college, I'm going with the fact that they were probably compromised at some point and used as a jump-off point. So hopefully, I think I have enough time. We'll get into the Data Hoarder's Guide to Surviving the Threat Intelligence Zombie Apocalypse. How many of you get flash reports from the FBI or vendor alerts or, yeah, quite a bit of us. You know, hey, Bob, I saw this on my network. You may want to look for it. So we get all this information in. And we hit a point where we're getting too much information that we cannot deal with. We are data hoarders. And we're prepping for the zombie apocalypse. Now, if we're lucky, the structure actually looks like this, where we actually have it in some semblance of order, correct? Well, that's a lot of information to still get through, and I don't know if we're going to do it, so let's see. Pardon me while I go through. So one of the things that we did was actually built, I can't see that very well, our own search engine that would go through and actually look at this information. Again, all open source tools. Building a search engine so that way we can actually look through. And let's just put FBI flash. I can't see from here, so I don't know if I'm spelling it right or not. There we go. I have to move it over to that side. But ultimately, we were able to pull up information. Now, this is a first-generation swag at this, so we were just trying to make sure that the proof of concept would actually work. But we were able to build this and take that information that we get in mass, dump it into a directory, and then instead of having to go through and read each one of the vendor alerts, we could now narrow down to very specific information. So if you think about the next step in iteration and the evolution of this, being able to tell it specifically what industry you belong to, what ports you're looking for, and being able to distill that information down and quickly retrieve it. Would there be any value in this? There's only 24 hours in the day, right? And most of us have to work 18 in InfoSec. Just saying. All right. That's about a quick of a review that we can give. So let's get into the business value. I'm going to get a bud skill because I'm going to be all serious now. So why is threat intelligence now? Well, we can take this information and actually protect and prevent larger impacts. Does anybody in here not have a responsibility to their organization or their customers? No? We've got to be sort of cognizant, especially of our employers, because they're the one who pays our check, right? So we want to keep them out of the media as much as possible, right? So if we can take a tool or a program, management program like threat intelligence and benefit our organization and keep them off of page one of the dispatch, that's a good day for us, right? Conversely, if we wind up on the first page of the dispatch, is that a good day or a bad day? Probably a bad day, right? Again, a lot of the threats that we're seeing, they are real threats, and they're not new. Have you guys all heard the term APT? Advanced Persistent Threat? How many times have we heard that, or we've heard it was a sophisticated or complex attack? Is clicking on an email a complex attack? Absolutely not. A lot of the times, criminal organizations and nation-state actors will use the path of least resistance. They will bombard you unless you have something that they really want and they're willing to invest the time and effort into it. So a lot of the stuff that we see on an incident response case tends to be a lot of the commodity attacks. We do have the ability to proactively defend ourselves. A lot of this information and the tools that are used are open source. They're free to use. You can get them in on little to no budget and not have to go to Jared as frequently as I did. We can change the way we operate and view our adversaries. Did you all sit in for this morning's keynote with Bill Segal? He made a great statement about organizations telling themselves that, you know, it doesn't happen to us. And if you're not looking at your SIM and you haven't been breached, you're not looking in the right places or hard enough. And that's absolutely true. Our adversaries view our computer systems totally different than we do. They're looking at things not only from, you know, anybody in here fall under PCI? Couple? Yeah. That's not the only asset that you have of value to a criminal organization. And that's one of many. So, threat intelligence as a business enabler. Disrupt adversarial reconnaissance, maximize our defensive capabilities, prioritize our resources, because they are limited. I feel like I'm on the deck of the Titanic. Ultimately, all this leads to is the ability for us to protect our organizations. And that's why we're in information security. We want to protect our organizations. Threat intelligence is a dimension of risk management. We've all heard of risk management, you know, the threats and vulnerabilities. This is another dimension to that. The threats to the organizations. They also allow us to enhance and step up our game when it comes to security operations. We can look for very specific things. We can identify outliers that could potentially impact our organizations before they occur. Again, if I can stop a phishing site or a spam site from hitting my organization before I have to respond to the outbreak, that's a good day. So what are some of the common challenges associated with threat intelligence? Well, first and foremost is capitalism. So a lot of vendors and organizations don't like to share information. And this is one of the things that can cripple us. This is one of the reasons why organizations like ISSA and the local ISC squared are big value to you as a security practitioner, because you can share that information in an environment where you get something of value in return without having to worry about, you know, do I have to pay $50,000, $60,000 for a list of bad IP addresses with no context behind it. Other challenge, legal and general counsel. Lawyers are there to protect the organization the same as we are. They just have a different way of doing it. One of the reasons why I always say get general counsel involved, because when you're sharing across multiple industries or with competitors, this is something that impacts our customer base directly. And while our focus is on our organization, we also have that dual responsibility of protecting our customers. Sharing that information across boundaries is a great way to protect our customers. Of course, nobody wants to be perceived as weak. If we have to admit that we've had an incident, that may be something that we have to report to. We may have a regulatory body, like the Security Standards Council, that we have to report to, or Department of Health and Human Services for those in the medical industry. Afraid of disclosing too much. We don't want to give all our information away. Unfortunately, for those of us who have been in the industry long enough, we know how to read things like DICE and LinkedIn, and we can pretty much profile what an organization's IT infrastructure looks like long before we ever hit it. Lacking the supporting infrastructure. You know, a lot of times organizations look at this and they go, oh, threat management, it's going to cost us, you know, the NSA budget. No, not really. Again, this is all part of the educational process associated with getting management to understand and commit. The final thing that I will leave you with that's a challenge to threat intelligence organizations or management programs and for organizations, knowing your environment. How many of you in here have a asset inventory of all your network and infrastructure? How many of you are confident and would be willing to bet the money in your wallet that it's accurate? One?
Well, I only got $5 in mine right now.
So knowing our environment, we can only protect what we know about. So going back to the original questions, who would attack us? We're in Ohio. Basically found out that anyone on the internet is willing to attack you. Basically the entire world. There's no such thing as being too small or not having a large footprint. If you're online, you're a target. Why would anybody want to attack us? It could be because of your intellectual property. It could be because you have regulated, controlled data, whether that's HIPAA, whether that's PCI, whether that's intellectual property that gives a competitor an edge in the market. There are any number of reasons. But it is currency. What's that? I'm getting old and I'm hearing things. And that is it.
One, I always really like listening to your presentation. Two, it's really funny that you say that. It's just, I have a firewall at home that, I have a firewall that protects me. And just for fun, I would change my IP dynamic on my IP, have two ISPs. And I would just change that, get new IP. And within 10 or 15 minutes, the same IP scanning. They're scanning the whole thing. So I thought, well, let's just open up, RDP. They scan RDP, and then guess what? Run a, packet capture on the computer. RDP's coming in now. They're scanning nonstop. As soon as they find a hole, it's like full blown, you're on their list.
And that's because they're going to leverage your asset to find a way to make money off of it. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a PCI-regulated system or a healthcare information system. If they can turn your system into mining Bitcoin, they're going to do it. If they can use it for hosting any number of dark web type sources, whether it's pirated music. I used to tell people the best way that I grew my MP3 collection was put an FTP server out online and made it anonymous. I collected like 10 gigs over a weekend. I don't need iTunes. They just give it to me. All right, if there's no further questions, hopefully you're enjoying the conference.